Hello all, welcome to this session. In this session, I'm going to explain one of the Java interview questions. That is, can you explain the purpose of finally block in Java? Let me answer. First of all, finally block in Java is used along with try-catch block. For what purpose try-catch block is used in Java? For handling an exception. So try-catch block is used in Java for handling an exception. At the end of the catch block, we generally write the finally block, and there is a purpose for that. So what is the purpose of this finally block? Why we have to use this finally block at the end of the try-catch block? When try-catch block is going to handle the exception, why finally block is required at the end of the catch block? I'm going to answer here. So in the finally block, we'll write the code which will close a file, okay, which will perform some tasks like, okay, in the finally block, we generally write the code which will perform some tasks like closing a file. If a particular file is not closed, okay, then it can close a file. If, for example, some database connection is not released, okay, that can be released in the finally block by writing some code. The task like closing a file, releasing a database connection, or any cleanup task, guys, okay, any cleanup of any resources like closing the objects which do some memory leak if they are not closed, such kind of cleanup things, releasing of the resources, connections, closing the objects, okay, closing file objects, etc., a class objects that have to be closed so that memory leak won't happen. Such kind of cleanup tasks and closing tasks will be performed in the finally block. Why only this kind of things like closing objects of different classes, or cleaning up, or releasing the resources, such kind of code, why we have to write only in finally block? Why? Because when an exception, okay, in the try catch block, when an exception occurs, so we generally write the code inside the try block to close that particular object. Assume that, okay, if you're trying to close after utilizing that code in the try block, if you want to, at the end of the try block, if you want to close some object or clean up some resources, that is not going to happen if an exception occurs way before in the try block, okay? Once an exception occurs in the try block will immediately send the control to the catch block, and because of which this cleaning up task or closing the objects or closing some files or cleaning up some resources won't be happening, guys, okay? Releasing the database connection, etc., which are initiated in the try block won't happen because the control suddenly went from the try back to the catch block. So no matter what, whether the exception comes or whether the exception doesn't come, if you want to clean up these resources, then we have to write a or specify finally block, okay? I'll show you practically, you'll understand, guys, what I am talking about. With some example, I'll show you so that you'll understand what is the exact purpose of the finally block, okay? With an example, if you understand, you'll be able to understand whatever I have explained so far in detailed manner. Further, I'll switch to Eclipse IDE and create a new class here. I'll right click here and create a new class here. I'll just name this class with some random name, let's say class 28. With the main method, I'll create with main method, I'll create class 28 with main method. So here, I'm going to write some code which will result in an exception, and also for handling that exception, we are going to use try catch block also, okay? Int a is equal to, or I'll write something like this, guys, okay? File is equal to new file. File is equal to new file. Control Shift O, and here provide some file. Let's say some file that doesn't exist in the project. In this particular project, that particular file abc.txt file is there, xyz is there, my last name with the last name and some file is there, but I'll give something like arun.txt file, okay? This arun.txt file with my name is not there in this project, okay? But I'm still providing that here. Now I'll write something like file input stream, stream, FIS is equal to new. Some example I'm taking as new file input stream. Okay, file input stream FIS is equal to new file input stream. When you create an object for this file input stream, Control Shift O, it will be automatically imported from java.io package. When you say Control Shift O here, and this file input stream cannot be empty, you have to pass the file. The name of the file have that object reference of the file to which this particular actual file it is referring to, that object reference we have to provide here. Once you provide here, Java is clearly guessing that there is a possibility of file not found exception. What if this particular file is not there? I'm ignoring the words of the Java, okay? Or I'll handle that with try catch block, okay? What if the exception comes? I would like to handle it, okay? Ignore, either you can ignore or you can handle it. So here I'll write down system.out.print. I'll try to perform some operation FIS dot, FIS dot read. Some code I am writing, guys, okay? read I'm writing. So don't worry about what code I'm writing here. I'm just simply, just writing that code. Okay. Or I'll do some other thing here. Otherwise, yeah, what is that? Just give me a second. FIS dot, FIS dot, something problem here. Okay, here I'll write again. Sir is going there suddenly. Fine. Okay, let's see. FIS dot, FIS dot something like hash code or whatever. I'll try to do something. FIS dot available, get class, get FD, mark, notify, read, read all bytes. A lot of things are there here. Okay, so I'll not do anything. I'll just write some code otherwise. Okay, system.out.println. So inside try block, inside try block. Okay, like this, I'll write the code. Right now, here I'll also write FIS dot close. Also, I'll write. Okay, I'll write the FIS dot close. Okay, here I'll say file not found exception, and here I'll write IO exception or whatever the exception. Is it solving the problem? Yes. Okay. Save this. So here I'm, trying to handle the exception wherever the exception comes. I'm trying to handle the exception. So file input stream, I'm closing here. I'm trying to clean up the object. Once the task is done, okay, some task I'm writing here, FIS dot read. Read also I'm writing because I changed the exception type here in the catch block. So int n is equal to, I just like to print out that n system.out.println n inside the try block. And finally, after the task of reading is done, file input stream is for reading, right? So we have performed the reading task from this particular file, which actually doesn't exist at the given path. Arun.txt file is not there in the project. So in such cases, what will happen, guys? In such cases, what will happen? So it will go to the catch block because you see, I handle the exception using try catch blocks. So file input stream, this particular constructor will give you an exception known as file not found exception, and that file not found exception will be handled here. Okay. Since IO exception is a parent of the file not found exception, it can capture it and handle the exception. System.out.println. I'll print the details of the exception that has occurred, which exception has occurred, whether file not found exception has occurred or IO exception has occurred, it will come. But ultimately, what happens in this program is system.out.println. I'll write down something like this. Just observe this, guys, what I'm trying to do. End of this program, I'll write end of this program. And here I'll write start of this program. Okay, system.out.println, start of this program. Start of this program. And this program clearly has a try catch block here, right? So there is some problem with this try catch block, I'll tell you. Even though the try block will give an exception and that exception given by the try block will be handled by the catch block, still there is a problem here. Okay, the execution will continue. You'll not see any problem here. But when I run the code, I'll tell you at the later point of time what is the problem. Start of this program, exception came, file not found exception came, and because this particular file doesn't exist in the project, and because of which the control came to the catch block, it printed the exception details here. Whatever the exception details, it got printed. And finally, end of this program, because the exception has handled, end of this program got printed. Fine, that's all good. We were able to handle the exception successfully. But what's the problem in this code is, the exception has occurred in this particular line 15, guys, okay? This particular line has thrown which exception? File not found exception it has thrown. Since the first line in the try block already has thrown the file not found exception, the control from this 15th line will come to the catch block directly and it will handle the exception. But here, did you see that FIS.close got executed? You see, this particular object has been created for the file input stream, and because of which an exception has been occurred. Since the exception occurred for this particular thing, is the object of this file input stream has been closed? Since the control came directly from the 15th line to the 19th line, and these three lines have not been executed because the control, because of the exception in this 15th line, the first line of the try block, the control directly came to the catch block, and because of which the exception has been captured by the catch block and handled by the catch block, and remaining code got executed. But what about this object reference? What about this object? This memory leak will happen here, guys, okay? FIS.close is not running. So this is a problem. If an exception occurs, the object, this particular object reference is not getting closed. The object is not getting closed because the control is coming directly from the try block to the catch block. If the exception doesn't come, then it will close. If the exception doesn't come, if the proper file name is provided, it will be closed. But if the exception comes, this will not be closed. So I want a solution for this. Whether the exception comes or whether the exception doesn't come, finally I'll write something known as finally block here. Inside the finally block, I'll try to close that fis.close. Okay, fis.close I'll say. Here error will come because the file input stream is declared inside the try block, so error will come. So here you'll see simply say null here and remove this double declaration. That is okay. Now what happens in this case, and here you are getting okay, there's a possibility of IO exception or whatever it is saying. You can ignore the exception, no problem. Air throws declaration or something you write, that's okay. So for now, you clearly understand, guys, if an exception occurs, file not found exception occurs here, the control will come to the catch block. And because of that, earlier fis.close was inside the try block that was not getting executed. Now you have put that fis.close inside the finally block. Whether the exception comes, okay, if the exception comes, if it go to the catch block, compulsory finally block also need to be executed. After the catch block, finally block need to be executed, and that particular object memory leak is happening, right? That will be closed as a good practice. Okay, so memory cleanup stuff, releasing the resources, releasing the database connections, all this cleanup tasks will be done in the finally block. If an exception comes, and if you put the same thing inside the same try block, that won't be executed and that cleanup task will not be done. But if the exception comes also, if you have to clean up that kind of task, you have to write inside the final block. And also if the exception doesn't come also, no problem. If the exception doesn't come after the try block, it will go to the final block. Whether the catch block is getting executed or whether the try block without exception is getting executed, the control will finally come to the finally block where this particular cleanup task will be anyhow done, whether the exception is there or whether the exception is not there. Anyhow, this particular object memory leak will be stopped. Instead of giving a chance for the Java garbage collector mechanism to close this particular object and all, okay, memory leaking to stop and all, after a later point of time, we can immediately close as a best practice by writing this finally block, which gets executed whether try block gets executed or catch block gets executed. Try block without exception gets executed, still final block will be executed. Okay, try block with exception comes means it go to the catch block. If the catch block is executed also, it will go to the final block and it will close the object and it will stop the memory leak too. It will stop the memory leak happening because the cleanup task is done irrespective of whether the exception comes or whether the exception doesn't come. If you run the code, you'll not see any difference, but the only thing that is happening for better here is start of this program, file not found exception has come. And did we not handle the exception? In which line? Java 23rd line. Okay, here we got the exception, guys. Okay, here we got the exception. That's okay, because we are trying to close something which has not been created yet. Okay, something like that. Okay, here also surround with try catch block. That's okay. It will be handling. So like that, guys, fis.close or any other objects that need to be cleaned up will be cleaned up here, irrespective of whether the exception occurs or not. Run the code here. It will not be any problem now. Okay, null pointer exception is coming this time. So here I have to give exception E, then it will be okay. Okay, now run the code here. Okay, end of this program. Whatever the exceptions come, that doesn't matter, guys. Okay, they will be handled and So irrespective of whether try catch executes or catch block executes, if you want to, okay. For example, here you got an exception here. Other example I'll take is just better example I'll take. fis.close only I'll give. Okay. So here I'll give a proper file name. Or I'll not get any file not found exception. Here I'll give something like abc.txt file, which is there in the project. In this case, here I'll try to say int a is equal to 9 divided by 0. I'll say what will happen here. 9 divided by 0. Here I'll say exception E, I'll say, or arithmetic exception I'll give. So because of this particular line given exception, what will happen here? Here, ignore the exception, guys. Nothing will happen. Ignore the exception. So here you see what's happening because of this particular line throwing an exception. Okay, and what's happening here? Because of this, otherwise here I'll write something like this. Okay. Before this, I'll write. Okay, object got created. File input stream object has been created, and since the exception is being thrown here, fis.close will not happen. Okay, so memory leak is happening, but this line is giving an exception because of the catch block went. Irrespective of that, we have to close that fis. Okay, so run this code. This is a perfect example. Now I can say run the code. You'll see that start of this program. Arithmetic exception came. Because the arithmetic exception came, it went to the catch block and it also closed the FIS, which has been created here. Irrespective of the things, it has closed this particular FIS. Okay, that's what happened. So like this kind of situations will come in real time where you have to clean up the things. Irrespective of an exception comes or not, we have to clean up the things. That's where we have to use finally block, guys. The finally block performs the task like, okay, you will write the code inside the finally block at the end of the try catch block to perform the task like closing a file, closing an object, from stopping the memory leak and releasing a database connection, or releasing or cleaning up any resources like this file input stream release resource we have to release, and all those kind of things can be released with the help of try catch block. This is one of the example, guys, that you can give in the interviews. If you get this kind of question in the interviews, you can answer something like this: why finally block is required? Due to some XYZ reasons, if an exception comes in the exception block, and the control go to the catch block, and because of that reason, if a particular object or resource is not cleaned up, okay, because that object was trying to be cleaned in the try block, and but unexpectedly the exception came in the try block. So such kind of situations to handle in advance, what we do is we'll put a final block at the end of try catch block. So whether the exception comes, whether the exception doesn't come, finally block with at any cost it will be executed and it will close the resources. Okay, no matter what, it will close the resources if they are created. Okay, so that's what is the thing, guys. That's what is the thing, and that's what is the answer for this question with practical demonstration. So that's all for this session. Thank you. Bye bye.